We've been looking at power encounters Jesus had with people who had big problems in their lives. And when they encountered Jesus, their lives were changed that very day and forever. And as we look at these encounters, I want us to see how Jesus can make a difference in your life, in my life, today and forever. Matthew, Mark, and Luke record the story of a man who had a big problem. His daughter was dying. And it reminds us of the twofold purpose of miracles. There is the present need, the present reality to help a person in great need. And there was the eternal truth or the eternal reality, which is a truthfulness that is good for all people at all times and in all places forever. In this story of the man who has a big problem that his daughter is dying, I want us to talk about the nature and character of how our faith grows in very, very practical ways. If you're interested in growing your faith, you will be interested in this story. We pick it up in Mark chapter 5, verse 22, where we read, "Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet." The first thing that happens for our faith to grow is there is the dilemma. There is the problem. Faith grows through big problems that we really can't handle. And so Mark writes, then, what is the then? The then means the same day. Then, the same day that he had cast out the legion of demons from a man and cast them into a herd of pigs. On this very same day, a man by the name of Jairus comes to Jesus. It's interesting that the Bible doesn't often name the people who have and receive miracles. There's just the blind man or the leper or the paralytic or the widow of Nain. We don't get too many names, but here Mark names this person. His name is Jairus. The reason he does that is because he is the leader of the local synagogue. That is, in their local community, he has a position of prominence and significance and importance. He has a position of ecclesiastical authority. And when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. This is an outward sign of an inward attitude of the heart. This man needs help, and he's turning to Jesus for that help. So he pleads with him on his knees desperately, Mark says. Imagine everything had been going his way in his life. He was a leader of the synagogue, a leader of the local community. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, unexpectedly, this big problem hit. And that's the way it happens in our lives. These big problems just sort of come out of nowhere. And he can't handle it, and there's nothing he can do about it. His daughter is dying, and he is leveled. He is devastated. He is humbled. He is brought to his knees. He is in the middle of what in the Greek is called a krisis, a crisis. A crisis is an unexpected event that crowds into our lives, that causes high levels of anxiety and stress and uncertainty. And for us, we want some kind of immediate resolution or immediate answer to that problem or that crisis. Now, Mark goes on to say that he has a little daughter, and Luke records that it's the only daughter of this man. In the Greek, the monogenesis. This daughter is his only daughter. She is the delight of his eyes, one of a kind, unique, special, set apart, only begotten. We find that word only begotten, monogenes, in the story of Abraham and Isaac. Isaac is Abraham's only begotten son, and he takes him to sacrifice him to be obedient to God. And then God rescues him. And we find that word in John 3:16. For God so loved what? The world, the cosmos, you and me, that he did something. He gave. What did he give? His monogenes, his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. This man is losing his monogenes, his only begotten daughter. So when he gets to Jesus, he doesn't negotiate. He doesn't present his credentials. For him, in his crisis, all of that stuff is absolute nonsense. He simply throws himself at the feet of Jesus. He is in great need. Help me, help me. I have come with a purpose. I am desperate. I have a dilemma that is bigger than I can possibly handle. Could you please come quickly? Please, please. When Jesus hears his pleas, he looks at the man and he says, yeah, I'll come to your house. Let's go. And he went with him. And Mark records there was a large crowd following that was pressing him, that was squeezing him on all sides. So how does faith grow? Well, first there's the dilemma, the big problem we can't understand. And secondly, there is the delay. Faith grows through waiting. In the next verses, we read the story of a woman in Mark chapter 5, beginning at verse 24. And she's got a big problem herself. All of a sudden, as the crowd is moving forward and Jairus is heading towards his home with Jesus, there is this sudden interruption. There is a woman who has had this unrelenting flow of blood for 12 years. She is a hemorrhaging woman for 12 years. And in those 12 years, she was ruled unclean because of her problem. So she was seen as insignificant, as unwanted. You don't belong here. You're not one of us. And for that very reason, she sneaks up behind Jesus in the crowd. She doesn't want anybody to see her, including Jesus. And she reaches out and she touches the edge of his garment. And when she does, she is immediately healed. And Jesus stops. And he says, "Who touched me? Who touched me?" Now, the disciples think that he's been out in the sun too long. Well, Master, the crowds are pressing and pushing you on all sides. They're squeezing you. There are lots of people touching you, lots of people trying to get hold of you. And Jesus said, no. Somebody touched me in great need, for I felt that power went out of me. And when the woman realized that she had not escaped notice, she admitted before everybody and Jesus why she had had to touch him. And he said to her, "You're healed. Go in peace. Go home. I have given you a new life. I don't ever want you to live in the darkness or the shadows or in that sense of I don't belong or I don't fit or I'm not wanted any longer." So there's that little story that interrupts this journey to Jairus' house. Now, what do you think's happening to Jairus? He's moving with the crowd and Jesus is with him, and all of a sudden he looks over his shoulders and he sees Jesus stop and engage in this conversation with this woman. And I can't help but wonder that Jairus is saying, "What are you doing? My daughter is dying. The clock is running out. The time is ticking." For you see, when Jesus stopped, everyone stopped. And when everyone stopped, Jairus stopped right in the middle of his crisis, of his dilemma, of his big problem that he couldn't handle. Smack dab in the middle of that crisis, he has to stop and wait on Jesus. Faith almost always has this dimension of delay and waiting to it. Whatever our dilemma, I'll bet that we have to wait at some point for the answer. Waiting is given by God because it builds character and strength and hope and endurance in us. When I used to do the chapel services for the National Football League Pittsburgh Steelers, I had the opportunity to look in the weight rooms, and it became clear to me that the offensive linemen and the defensive linemen were some of the largest human beings that I would ever see in my entire life. They were absolutely enormous, and they were so strong. For their muscles to grow, it would require great tension and resistance to break down their muscles and build them again, build them up over time. They would start small when they were younger in junior high or senior high, and then they would push and strain those muscles day after day, week after week, year after year. They would stretch them through the soreness and through the aches and the pains, so that over time they became stronger. To get to the next level of strength, to get to be stronger and stronger and stronger, it took time. And faith is like that. It is a muscle. Faith is a muscle. And to develop that muscle, there is always that dimension of delay to it. It is how God builds character and strength in us. Through time, by waiting. Now we read in Mark 5:35, While Jesus was still speaking, listen to this absolutely devastating news. Some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, and they said, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?" The third component of building our faith is this sense of doubt that we have. There's the dilemma, then there is the delay, the waiting, and then there is doubt. Faith grows through uncertainty. While he was waiting, a woman was healed, and the crowd cheers. They're shouting. And then all of a sudden, a voice rings out over all of the noise of the crowd. "Your daughter is dead. Your daughter is dead." And the shouts turn to silence and disbelief. The father hears that his daughter had died. That is a father's greatest nightmare, the loss of a child. I sometimes watch on TV the tragic events of school shootings or accidents where the child's life is taken. And I can't help but think every time I see that, that could have been my child. And how would I feel if I were that father? Because death is so cold and it's so harsh and so irreversible. It seems to be so final. It's our adversary. We fight against it. It's not supposed to happen this way. It's unnatural. And we resist it and we fight against it. And so this father's heart must have been broken at that moment. The world crowds in on him. And I can imagine that he starts to ask the same questions of the crowd. Why bother Jesus anymore? The if onlys creep in. You know, if only I had started earlier, if only I'd gotten Jesus quicker, if I only had thought of that, if only the woman hadn't stopped him. The doubt creeps in. Where were you when I really needed you? Where were you? Now it's too late. Ever felt like that? Now it's too late. And that is when doubt sets in and we begin to lose hope and we begin to lose faith. Our faith gets undermined. It gets filled with uncertainties. Now, for sure, there's nothing that can be done. You could have healed her, but you can't raise her from the dead. Faith grows through uncertainty. And for that reason, uncertainty and doubt is not to be avoided. It is to be embraced by the believer. It's a part of the building of faith in our hearts and our minds. We read in Mark chapter 5, verse 36, overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Do not be afraid, just believe." Do not be afraid, just believe. The fourth dimension of building a stronger faith inside of us is the dimension of a decision, that faith grows through choices. Jesus overheard what they said, and he said to the man, "Don't listen to them. Don't be afraid. Don't let your fears give way to doubt. Don't let them gain a foothold in your heart." The fact is that most of the time, fear is a worthless emotion in our lives. It can't change the past, and it can't do anything about the future. In fact, faith is an acquired skill. The more we worry, the better we get at worry. But the good news is that if fear and a lack of faith is something we learn, then it's also something we can unlearn. Do not be afraid. Just believe. Faith comes about through choices and decisions. The antidote to fear and the antidote to doubt is to get rid of the fear factor by making a decision. Jairus, you have a decision to make. You can live your life in fear and uncertainty and doubt, or you can believe me. Choices always move us from ambiguity to clarity. Once we make a decision of who we believe in, then we face life differently, and our faith grows. Our choices make a difference in our life. He has a decision to make. Do not fear, just believe. The story continues. They make their way to the house. And when they get there, they find out that back at the house, events had moved quickly from his little daughter's death. The Hebrew tradition was to hire professional mourners when someone would die, and the more significant that person, the greater the mourners, and the more that you would have, and the more expensive it would get. And because he's a leader of the synagogue, there are lots of mourners there, professional mourners. And they're filling the house with this loud wailing and this loud crying as a sign of this great loss. I've been with parents who have lost children. I remember one father, he said to me, I never knew this level of pain could exist in life. He was brought to his knees. I've walked through the halls of the children's hospitals and seen parents watching their little children suffer, and there's absolutely nothing there can do. The pain of this man and this family must have been enormous. And when they get there, there's all of this commotion taking place. And in the midst of that, Jesus said, "She is not dead. She is asleep." Well, what does he mean by that? Well, in the Greek, the word death and the word sleep are often used interchangeably. When Jesus arrived at the house of Lazarus, he said, "Our friend is not dead, he's asleep." Well, he was dead. He'd been buried for 3 days and rotting in a tomb. His body was decaying. But Jesus said he's asleep. Paul says in 1 Thessalonians that he speaks about those of us that have fallen asleep, that is, those who have died. So he turns to the professionals, and he's not denying that she's dead. He's denying that death is final, that it's complete. He's denying that death is in control. He's saying death is not the ultimate power over life. I am. I am the one who is in control. And notice what their response was. They laughed at him. We're the professional mourners around here. We know all about death. We've seen it many, many times. And when we see it, we know it. The child is dead. And what does Jesus do? Mark tells us he puts them all out. Put them all out. He sends away the doubters. Because faith is a choice. It's not that we don't doubt, we all doubt. But in the midst of that, we make a decision to move towards faith and belief. So Jesus says, enough with the doubters. Let's get the encouragers, the believers. And he takes the mother and the father and his 3 closest associates, Peter and James and John, and they enter the house and they stand by her bedside. And Mark writes in verse 41 of the 5th chapter, he took her by the hand and he said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. There's a connection that takes place. There is that dilemma. There is that delay. There is that doubt. There is that decision. And then finally, for our faith to grow, there is a connection that we make with God. He sees Jairus. Jairus is no longer the synagogue leader in that sense, in that moment. He's the father. And Jesus takes the father and the mother and his closest friends, Peter, James, and John, and they go into where the child is. And they gather around her bed. And he takes her hand. He touches her with power and with exousia, with authority, with power, with dunamis, and exousia, with authority. And he says to her, little girl, I say to you, get up. Get up. In the present imperative, it is a command. Get up. Get up. And immediately she stood up. And I'm sure that at that moment she opens her eyes. And when she does, the first person she is looking at is Jesus. She is looking directly into his eyes. I love that analogy because I understand it that when we die in this world and pass through the portal of death, physical death, to spiritual life in the next world in heaven with Jesus, we close our eyes in this world, and in an instant we will be looking directly into his eyes. What comfort that is. Oh, what comfort that is to us. And he'll open his arms and embrace us and tell us, come on, I've prepared a special place for you. This is where you belong. This is what you were made for. And so she's looking directly into the eyes of Jesus. And then she walks, Mark says. She's smiling. She embraces her mother and her father. At this moment, Jesus has unleashed all of the power of heaven on the final adversary, on the final enemy, which is death itself. And all of the spiritual beings in hell are watching and trembling in terror as he takes control over death itself. It's like a nuclear explosion when he touches her life. Jesus raised people from the dead 3 times in the New Testament. And every time he restored their relationship with God and with each other. These broken relationships. Here we see the first instance of Jesus raising someone from the dead, this little girl, Jairus' daughter. He raises Lazarus from the dead. And then he raises the son of the widow of Nain from the dead. 3 times he raises people from the dead and exhibits this power that he has over death itself. He's saying, trust me, believe in me. If I have power over death, I have power over life itself. So Jesus answers this man's prayer. Now, God doesn't always answer our prayers in exactly the way we ask for them. And I'm thankful for that because my prayers come from a limited, finite vantage point of what I think should happen. And God doesn't always answer the prayers in the way that I think they should happen, but God always does answer my prayers from an eternal, unlimited perspective. His answers are always better than the prayers that I pray. So what's the takeaway? What's the so what? What difference does this make in our lives this day and forever? How does faith grow in our lives? Well, remember these dimensions of faith. First, there is the dilemma. Faith grows with a problem that's too big for you and I to handle. Identify your problem, whatever problem it is that you have. Write it out. Get it clarified. Get crystal clarity on it. And then bring it before Jesus. This is what I'm asking. And then there's the delay. Faith grows through waiting to build our muscles, to build character inside of us. And then there's the doubt. Faith grows through uncertainty. It's not to be avoided. It's to be accepted and understood. And then there is the decision that faith grows through choices. Do not be afraid. Believe. And then there is the connecting power of God. Faith is connecting with God's very power over death itself. And if he has power over death, he has power over life. So here we have a power encounter with Jesus, which demonstrates his supernatural lordship over death itself. He assures you and me that he can overcome any dilemma, any problem in our lives that is too big for us to handle. He is the master of handling the problems that are too big for us. He can handle anything that life can bring our way. Do not be afraid. Just believe.